The field of Eardology is a brand new field based off of extremely old technology and scientific information and discovery that made possible the things like Stonehenge, the pyramids, and the library at Herculopolis, Herculopolis. Herculopolis. The root of Herc is also the same root as the language of the Egyptian language of hieroglyphic. The problem with science, modern science, is that it is equal parts anti-Semitic as it is the need to control information that is created. There's just as much demand for control over said information as there is information itself, as well as massive amount of anti-Semitism with difficult aspects of understanding of how to be that angry regarding Jews. But nonetheless, the anti-Semitism is there. Example: one of the key historians to the Greek and Roman time, the Greco-Roman situation, is Herodotus. The language of Ionian was almost exclusively used by Jews. Not Hebrews, Jews. And there's huge reasons why there's a difference between Hebrews and Jews. Mostly because Jews are Jews from Judah, from the 12th son of Jacob, and Hebrews are from Moses and his line that are from Avaris and the Hyksos back to Esau, the brother of Jacob, who had a soul-level hatred of his brother Jacob. From his first breath to his last breath, he hated his brother with the pit of 1,000 suns. He hated him, loathed, he was disgusted by him, and everything Jacob did in his life only enraged his brother more. Eardology was destroyed as a direct result of that hatred. And the amount of hatred is easy to see from 4500 BC up to and through current, because the hatred was there before Noah, was there through Terah and attacking the Tower of Babel, trying to conquer God because of the hatred regarding the same philosophy that Jacob 100 years later would adopt, take on, and then rule Israel himself, his country, his people. Eardology is a key aspect of all that stuff, of all those actions, of all those behavior patterns, of all that hatred and rage and the Tower of Babel, and the need for Esau's descendants to destroy it. Now, the first rule of mathematics is to measure to and from fixed points. So you have to go by the concept of you have to measure to and from fixed points. This cannot be made clear enough. To and from fixed points. What on earth can we absolutely 100% guarantee without equivocation is a fixed point in nature? If your civilization is advanced enough that understands electromagnetics, then it understands the thing called a compass. And the compass needle, a magnetized piece of metal, usually built on some type of a floating device, a leaf, a cork, something that will float. And that floating thing is put in water or some kind of a viscous fluid that allows for movement. That cork will allow the needle to move according to the pull of the North Pole. The electromagnetic North Pole will pull the needle to point it at it every single solitary time without exception. And the exceptions are extreme. It will not point at the North Pole if you're standing on the North Pole. It'll rotate in circle because everywhere is the North Pole. The Arctic Circle is also rather large, but it's also, that's where the magnetic north is. So if you're standing in the Arctic Circle, all the compass needle is going to do is rotate, because everywhere is north. That is defined as a fixed point. So follows the first rule of mathematics. Now, how do you achieve? How do you obtain? How do you to understand what magnetic north is? Well, you obtain an understanding of magnetic north by understanding that the Earth has a magnetosphere, and that magnetosphere is made of electricity. Now, that electricity is in part created by the sun, because the sun not only controls that electricity, but it also controls the electromagnetic structure that the Earth revolves within, and the electromagnetic structure, organizational apparatus of the Earth's orbit around the sun. And the Earth passes through, based on the rules of electromagnetics, 8 key points in a 365.4 degree year. 365 days, 0.4, which means that there's a few hours left over at the end of the year. Those hours are added together to make up a 366 days every 4 years, with a couple exceptions every few centuries. This is incredibly important, because it follows the first rule of mathematics. It is also entirely based off of the rules of electromagnetics. So you have fixed points and electromagnetics working together. Now, anti-Semitism hates working with electromagnetics. The people who hate Jews have a soul-level hatred of anything to do with electromagnetics, and will do everything they could think of to use just enough of them to use enough electromagnetics to function, but mostly ignore them and ridicule them and toss them away as if they do not exist. Example: Nikola Tesla, whether he was a Jew or not, whether or not his ancestors were Jews or not, does not matter at all. What matters is that he created inventions in the 1800s, middle to late 1800s, from 1870 to 1910, that are still up, working, operating, and powering Western culture to this very second. The Niagara Power Station is entirely Nikola Tesla's invention, 1880. He created radar. He created AC. He created the direct aspects of modern electricity. He created them. Now, there's a huge argument between Tesla and Edison. Edison was American. He had a better publicity machine, and his Menlo Park was thousands of engineers doing their work, and he just mostly took the credit. Tesla was a single engineer who did all the work and didn't worry about credit. All he cared about was making sure his lifestyle was paid for, so he can continue playing around and tinkering in the laboratory, which he did. He also created Wi-Fi a century before it was reinvented and it has become part of everyday life. But it was invented before radio was invented. So you have a disgust over electromagnetics. Eardology is based off of electromagnetics. Eardology is everything about Eardology, AErdology. Everything about Eardology, Earth, Erd, AErd, Old High German for Earth, Ology, Latin for the study of, is about measuring to and from fixed electromagnetic points, be it magnetic north, be that the 8 fixed points in the Earth's orbit around the sun, or the 24-hour day, give or take 24-hour day. Everything's about measuring to and from electromagnetic fixed points. Now, what is the most important aspect to understand about measuring to and from electromagnetic points is that it's mostly invisible unless you have equipment that is sensitive enough to be able to measure, first identify, and then measure electromagnetics. One of the key aspects to all concepts that are revolving around from the steampunk revolution of the 1700s to the modern age is there's a concept about time travel. Time travel is absolutely 100%, 1 billion% impossible unless you understand the basics of motion. And the basics of motion on planet Earth are different than the basics of motion everywhere else. Because the basics of motion everywhere else follows the 5 rules that Einstein, Newton laid out in the 1400s. Bodies at rest will stay at rest. Bodies in motion will stay in motion. Equal and opposite reaction to force. 2 objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time. This is not true electromagnetically. And then, of course, you have multiple objects doing all kinds of multiple things, the 5th rule. You have all kinds of objects doing all kinds of things in exactly the same space and exactly the same time, and they affect things differently. Not just 2 objects in the same place at the same time, but you have multiple 20, 30, 50, 1,000 objects in the same exact space at exactly the same time, moving differently and affecting each other and the outside world at the same time. Those rules break down to push, pull, and neutral, a magnet. Time travel is only possible if you understand the rules of magnetics. One side of a magnet is positive, the other side of a magnet is negative, and the middle is neutral. 2 ends of a magnet together will push each other apart. 2 ends of a magnet together will pull each other forward, and the neutral will react neutrally to each other. So you have to remember this is a fixed thing. The positive is fixed, the negative is fixed, and the neutral between is fixed. All those fixed things, all those fixed concepts are what Eardology is based off of. Now, when you combine all that stuff together, you have midsummer, which is a fixed point, and you have midwinter is a fixed point, and you have 6 others that are fixed points. Eardology is based off of the Earth's rotation around the sun, electromagnetically creating those 8 fixed points also your ninth fixed point, which is whatever your birth date is. Your birth date is your own individual fixed point. Wherever you were born on that specific time and day, place, time and day, is your fixed point. The amount of seconds, hours, days, weeks, months, years, decades from that fixed point is your own individual fixed point counts. You have to remember that all ancient languages, Western culture, ancient languages, hieroglyphics, cuneiform, linear A, Dinka, so on. The dozen or so ancient languages pre-500 BC, those languages, the characters were both letters and numbers depending on how they were used in the sentence. So number one would be one, and in this case F, because Latin would not exist for 1,000 years. Well, 500 BC, Latin would existed for 200 years, but it was only used in Rome proper. This is Western culture wide, so it was only used in a very small place. Now, 1,000 years later, that small place would grow and expand and conquer and be most of northern Africa, the Middle East, all of the Mediterranean, and a portion of the European continent, and a portion of the island of Britain. That was Rome, so they used Latin a lot in all those areas. But that's 1,000 years later. This is 500 BC. The Arabic numbers 0 through 9 had not been invented yet. Well, it had been invented, but it had not been widely used outside of the very small areas where it had been invented, and had traveled around based on scholars and caravan use. So that fixed point mathematics based off of a single number line, it works on basic on mathematics, but it actually doesn't actually work on mathematics, because there's nothing in this world that is actually one-dimensional. So a single number line is a one-dimensional thing. It doesn't work because there's nothing it can be compared to that's one-dimensional. Thought is multidimensional. Every single solitary quark has mass, which means it's multidimensional. It's width, breadth, and depth. So it has depth. No matter how small that depth is, it still has depth, therefore it's still multidimensional, which means a single number line does not work. Which is the biggest problem that Hupp has, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, is that it cannot apply the single number line to fix the true serious equations in physics, because it's using a tool that can never measure quarks. It can kind of sort of guess at them, and the more serious situations around physics are all statistics. It's all plus or minus X amount. Nothing's exact. It's all give or take. It's all 10,000 parts per billion, or 1 part per billion, or 300 billion parts per billion. Parts per billion it's a statistical analysis. You cannot have a human or a computer count out 300 million out of a billion parts. So looking through a microscope, that's just not going to work. So they create statistical models to do that. That is not measuring to and from fixed points. That is guessing. Erdology is all about measuring to and from fixed points and using the rules of electromagnetics, push, push, pull, pull, neutral, and of course the 5 rules of Newton, in order to be able to identify and then measure electromagnetics. Once you start to identify and measure electromagnetics, you can then finally start to build a map of the structure of time. And once you start building a map of the structure of time, a map can be traveled. You can then travel time with a map. But until the map is identified, don't bother trying to travel it.